Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Robert. I'm the director of Colorado's nonprofit program called Resilient Restaurants of Colorado. We're the state's leading coalition of values-driven food service businesses, and our commitment to the triple bottom line economic business model includes environmental sustainability and social equity. And I'm really excited to have this webinar meeting today for our members and for any food service businesses interested in learning more about alternative wage models and experiencing some of the programming that Resilient Restaurants provides. We did a workshop last year with one of our leading members talking about some of the financial implications of implementing what we call equitable compensation models. And today we're going to get into a legal conversation. And this is we're going to have about a 30-minute presentation and then have a Q&A session at the end. Anyone is welcome to forward your questions in the chat, and you'll have the ability as a participant to ask your question live on video to one of the presenters or myself. And, I think just to open up the conversation, obviously, this conversation has a lot of relevant points right now. As we've all been stating, the COVID pandemic has illustrated a lot of vulnerable and broken aspects of the food service industry. And certainly when we talk about wages and all the aspects of that in the industry, the culture around it, the inequalities, the inequities. And we are now at a time in the industry where we have an opportunity to redesign our businesses and really push the industry forward. And Resilient Restaurants and our membership as an alliance stands for really improving the workforce in food service in the following ways. We want to see a new development of professional full-time workers in this industry. We want to create a work environment that trains people up to this new vision that we have, and to be able to support people in a very quickly changing environment. It's not only just our, the national economy and unemployment aspects. There are social equity aspects around wages. For years, we've been experiencing increased minimum wages in Colorado. And obviously, there's a potential effort to change the minimum wage nationally. And so for the last number of years, if you've been in food service, you've probably been addressing this question, which is, how am I going to adapt to the changing environment from an economic standpoint, from a workforce development standpoint, and more specifically, to be able to address the needs and desires of new workers, new generations of workers that have a different perspective on what this industry is and what it should provide. And this is an inclusive conversation that we need to have, we being owners and managers and supervisors and all employees in food service, whether you're in the hospitality side or in the culinary side. Your voice matters, and everybody should be contributing to this conversation so that we can collaborate and redesign the industry in a way that works for everybody. So today I'm really excited to introduce to you Milgrom and Daskam, which is a B Corporation law firm based in Denver. And they have been preparing for this webinar, and we're really excited to offer it. It's going to basically cover all of the basics from a legal standpoint that you need to know about these, what we call equitable compensation models. And today speaking with us is going to be Amanda Milgrom, who is a principal and a partner and executive director of the law firm, and Jason Fisher, who is an associate at the law firm. And to kick things off, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to you and Good Business Colorado and Resilient Restaurants for having us. We're really excited to get to be part of this conversation and work with restaurants to hopefully take advantage of some of these opportunities and learn more about new ways that they can offer different alternative pay structures. So thank you all for being here today, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. We really appreciate it. Hope this will be helpful. Like Robert said, at the end, you can ask questions. We'll also have our emails at the end. So if you're watching this on a recording and you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to Jason or I. Even if it's weeks or months from now, we'd love to hear from you and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. As Robert said, my name is Amanda Milgrom. I'm a partner here with Milgrom and Daskam. I'm here with my colleague, Jason Fisher. We are the employment group here at Milgrom and Daskam. We work with clients on a range of employment issues, from hiring to firing, implementing different policies, keeping up to speed with the changing laws, of which there have been a lot recently here in Colorado, working on handbooks, non-competes, you name it, we do it in the employment space. I also practice civil litigation and run our litigation practice, where we do business disputes, intellectual property infringement, all sorts of stuff. So thank you all so much for being here. Jason, I'll let you introduce yourself quickly as well.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so as stated, my name is Jason Fisher. I'm an associate with the law firm Milgrom and Daskam, and I practice employment law with Amanda, handling all those issues that she brought up. However, my practice differs from hers in that I don't handle any litigation. Instead, I practice more of a general corporate law. So that covers everything from the formation of new businesses through drafting and negotiating agreements for their kind of service, as well as acquisitions and mergers when they're looking to exit, and security office offerings for their financings along the way. And so with that, we can jump right in. We're going to start off with an agenda here, just to give a brief overview of what you can expect today. So, we want to talk about why we are here, why we're discussing this issue. We'll go into what the tipped wage credit is, which many of you may already know, but we want to kind of just start at the basics there to go over it, and then demonstrate what inequities it produces, as well as how doing away with it can lead to certain benefits that might incentivize employers to change. After that, Amanda's going to discuss these alternative equitable pay models that are available, and some of the legal implications that you should be aware of with those. And then, we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. So as was stated, please feel free to toss them in the chat, or during that Q&A, please feel free to come off mute and ask them of Amanda or I or Robert. And, we'd love to hear from you. Make this really kind of an inclusive discussion. All right. So the basics of the tipped wage credit, like I said, you may already know this, but just to give a brief overview here of the ins and outs, the tipped wage credit allows employers to pay a worker less than the minimum wage, provided that their tips bring them up to at least the minimum wage. So only tipped employees are eligible for the tipped wage credit. A tipped employee is any employee that is in a position that customarily and regularly receives more than $30 per month in tips. The tipped wage credit is currently $3.02. So applying that towards Colorado's current minimum wage of $12.32, tip workers get paid $9.30 per hour. Of course, the Colorado minimum wage is indexed to change. So that's the current minimum wage effective Jan 1, 2021, pursuant to the comps order that was effective then. But both the minimum wage and the tipped wage credit are subject to the index for change. So you'll see both of them go up as wages go up. So you'll want to keep an eye on that as you're kind of running your business. But we're here to talk about how the tipped wage credit allows a sub-minimum wage, and how that creates all sorts of inequities in the restaurant industry. So we want to have this discussion about why you should switch, why you should look for an alternative equitable pay model. So first, we want to discuss the economic instability and pay differential. Tip workers are far more likely to experience economic instability because their pay is subject to those ups and downs, the variances that comes with receiving a sub-minimum wage plus tips. Additionally, they're more likely to have to feel they need to hold 2 or more jobs in order to make ends meet, which is, of course, a stressful situation for anybody, and it can really impact job performance. kind of cementing the harm to these workers. The pandemic, hit the restaurant industry perhaps the hardest, and times are tight right now for a lot of people. And so restaurant workers have reported that tips are down. They've declined significantly just across the country. Further, the pay differential between front of house and back of house is a frequent source of workplace tension. What this means is that it can often cause a lack of job satisfaction, and that leads to less qualified candidates in those positions, and as well as higher turnover. So, front of house servers often make between $3 to $6 more per hour than their back of house counterparts. It makes it very difficult for employers to retain qualified people in those positions when they have that difference. And second, and I believe this is maybe the most important inequity that should be addressed by moving away from the tipped wage credit, is discrimination and sexual harassment. So we have some statistics up here on the screen. You'll see that 70% of tipped workers are women. Those women are often subject to sexual harassment, but are unable to speak out because they fear it would jeopardize their ability to receive tips. In addition, the tip structure encourages women to wear more revealing clothing or flirt with customers that they may not feel comfortable doing in order to earn more tips. So just not a great situation all around there. You'll also see, 45% of restaurant workers are people of color. They're often excluded from the highest paying fine dining establishments. So only 22% of people of color and 43% of women are employed in those highest paying front of house positions in fine dining establishments. And then, the studies show that even when people of color are in those highest paid front of house positions, white servers still make more in tips overall than Black servers. And tipping really, the discrimination it presents is kind of across the board. So other discrimination that results is that younger servers are often tipped higher than older servers. More traditionally attractive servers are tipped higher than less traditionally attractive servers. So it really, tipping has become this vehicle for discrimination that we should address. As well as, benefits and unemployment are often not available to these sub-minimum wage workers. Employer-sponsored health insurance can be an incredibly valuable tool for employers who are looking to retain high-quality employees. Additionally, coming out of the pandemic, this is especially important because of health and safety. So many tipped workers do not get paid sick days. And so many of them report coming to work when they are ill. And that's not good for anybody. It places coworkers as well as patrons of the restaurant in danger. So the ability of an employer to offer these benefits like paid sick days or employer-sponsored health insurance really leads to a healthier work environment all around. Additionally, one of the odder parts that came out of the pandemic was how unavailable unemployment assistance was to tipped workers. The restaurant industry was hit incredibly hard. Of the millions who lost their job, it's estimated that 1 in 4 was a restaurant worker. And then of those 1 in 4, about 60% were unable to access unemployment benefits because their wage was too low to qualify. So it kind of compounded an already bad situation and made it worse. As we're coming out of the pandemic, we're at this turning point where we think it's probably the perfect time to change how the restaurant industry pays its employees in order to address these inequities. And additionally, at this time of change, customers may be more willing, more primed to accept that change than they would as they return to a normal routine of eating out. And then one last inequity, we kind of wanted to call out one last item to end on a lighter note. The US is one of the few countries that still has such widespread tipping. So we wanted to show a short video from the internet. So I'm going to swap over to that and play that now. Give me just one moment.
most of our income comes from tips. A world-renowned Olive Garden, a multi-million-dollar franchise, does not have the money to pay its employees fairly and must therefore rely on the customer to pay a living wage. That's just how it's done. This is illegal, yeah. So with the delicious unlimited breadsticks, I have now been served a disgusting unlimited moral dilemma. You don't have to. Of course I do. You're forced to stand on your feet all day, work long hours, do all of this with a happy face, and yet your employer does not pay you enough. Business costs. Then the business should not exist. I think this is customary in all Olive Garden establishments. Sir, it's not just.
So a quick video there kind of showcasing, how the US is sort of the only country that still has this tipping structure, as well as the onus it places on customers to provide for tipped workers and kind of the moral dilemma that they face with that. But now I'm going to pass it over to Amanda, and she's going to discuss the alternative equitable pay models that we'd recommend to you today. So.
Thanks, Jason. I know it was a little hard to hear that video, but hopefully the subtitles were helpful. And I think we just wanted to include that to show that, there is a lot of space for these alternative pay models. And I think as a country, we're sort of set in this one way, but most of the world is doing it differently. And there's a lot of different ways we can be doing it differently too. So we're going to talk about some of those here today. We're going to start by talking about some of the trends that we're seeing across the country. With legislation states are implementing to actually just do away completely with the tipped wage credit. Then we're going to dive into two of the most popular and what we think are the most successful alternative pay models, the service charge, and then secondarily the tip pooling. And finally, we'll just touch on a couple other options that are available if the tip pooling or service charge is just a little out of reach for you right now. So let's start by talking about the trends we're seeing in at least 7 states now have all passed legislation that disallows tip credits altogether. In these 7 states, businesses are required to pay the full minimum wage, including to tipped employees. What's interesting is that what we're seeing here is that these restaurants are continuing to receive really high tips. So even though these businesses are now paying full minimum wage with the option for a tip on top of that, customers are not tipping any less. And so we're seeing prior to COVID, which we're not going to count this past time period, customers are leaving around 16% in tips on top of waiter or waitress's full minimum wage pay. Another thing we're seeing is that restaurant sales growth in these 7 states has been higher than in states without it. So I think this directly combats a lot of concern that by increasing pay and increasing the cost of going out to eat, you're going to see fewer and fewer customers going out and patroning these restaurants. That just has not been borne out in the states that have passed this legislation and acted as sort of the guinea pigs for this. I also want to talk about, there's just a couple other benefits to the full minimum wage pay in addition to addressing some of the issues that Jason talked about. What they're finding in these 7 states is that the poverty rate among tipped workers is actually 1/3 lower than in states that have a tipped wage credit. They're also finding that the rate of sexual harassment among female workers drops in half. It's a pretty astronomical number, I think. This is especially important, we think, right now, as across the country, due to COVID, we're seeing a 50 to 70% drop in tips. There really is a need to increase wages for folks who right now are making below minimum wage. We're not seeing any movement in Colorado on this front at this time. There doesn't appear to be much of a legislation coming through that's going to get rid of the tipped wage credit. Of course, that doesn't mean that you as a business can't decide to do this on your own and just pay minimum wage. There's so many benefits to doing it. Of course, one is happier employees are going to be nicer to your patrons. In turn, patrons are going to come back more, refer their friends, grow your network. In addition, you're going to have better retention of your employees. across any industry, the cost of hiring and training employees is high. In the restaurant industry, it's estimated that it's at least $1,500 to $2,500 per employee every time you have to hire someone new and retrain them. So it's quite a bit of money that you're offsetting by increasing their wages by a small amount. All right, let's move on and we'll talk about service charges. Service charges are what we recommend as the sort of gold standard for moving away from the wage tip credit and a sub minimum wage model to these alternative pay models. There's two primary alternatives we're going to talk about, the service charge and the tip pooling, but starting with the service charge here. The service charge is an extremely flexible model, which is one of the reasons that we really love it. There are several varieties of this model, which I'll get into in a moment. One highlight I want to make from a legal perspective is that unlike tips, which can only be shared amongst folks who normally or typically receive tips, so these would be your waiters and waitresses, bus boys and girls, but would exclude your chefs, your dishwashers, the folks on the back in the back of the house. Unlike tips, a service charge belongs to the employer, and so the employer may share it with anyone they like, including the back of house staff and management. So there's a lot more flexibility in the service charge model. There's two ways restaurants go about doing it. One is to eliminate tipping entirely and just replacing it with a larger service charge. Generally, we're seeing around 15 to 20%. You're going to see this typically on the bottom of your bill. So instead of having a place to write your tip in, you're just going to have service charge with the percentage already input for you. The other options are restaurants are doing a hybrid model between regular tipping and a service charge. So they'll have a 3 to 5% service charge there on the bill with another option below to add an additional tip. The service charge you'll often see called either a kitchen staff appreciation charge, a livable wage charge, or sometimes an employee health care charge. If you see that latter name, that typically means that that amount of money is going towards paying for health care benefits for the employees, which, as Jason touched on before, is quite rare in the industry. Some examples of restaurants adding a service charge are Altrea, Zomama, and Sitio City here in Denver. One thing I do want to mention as well from a legal and financial perspective is unlike tipping, the service charge counts as income towards your business. So you do have to pay taxes on it. Just be aware of that because it does differ quite a bit from typical tipping. It also cannot count towards your tip credit. So if you're implementing the service charge and eliminating the tipping at all, then you do need to pay the full minimum wage to all of your employees, including folks who typically would receive tips. If you are interested in this model and you have a lot of questions, I mean, feel free to ask us at the end here, but also Robert has a number of organizations or businesses in his organization who implement this model, and he can connect you with folks if you want to get some boots on the ground experience, folks talking to you about it. Now we'll move on to tip pooling. Under a tip pooling model, all of the tips received are aggregated and then allocated to the staff proportionally. So there's a couple different ways you could go about doing this. You can do it by percentage. So each role is assigned a percentage. So your wait staff is assigned one role, your dishwashers are assigned a different role, or I'm sorry, your busboys are assigned a different role, et cetera, et cetera. You can also allocate it by hours. So the staff who worked more hours are receiving more of the tips. Note, if you're claiming the tip credit, so if you're paying a sub minimum wage and supplementing with the tip credit, you cannot share pooled tips with the back of house staff. In contrast, if you are paying the full minimum wage, then you can share. That tipped wage credit, whether you're offering it or not, really limits your ability to use tip pooling and how it works. Please note, you may never, regardless of whether you're using the tipped wage credit or not, you may never share tip pooling with the managers and supervisors. If you are not implementing the tipped wage credit, like I said, you can use it with the back of house staff. You can share tips with them, but you can't share them with managers and supervisors still. So that's a distinction between the tip pooling and the service charge. I think we have one more slide on tip pooling here. Yeah, so these are a couple things to note as the employer or owner. If you do decide to implement tip pooling, Colorado statutes require that a bunch of notice requirements. So first, you have to have a pre-established policy on tip pooling. We recommend having something in writing with your employees, whether it's in your employee handbook or just a standalone policy. You have something you hand out when they first join you, just so they know this is how we do things a little bit different here. You also have to inform your tipped employees, not only that their tips will be shared, but what their contribution amount will be. So whether you're doing it by percentage or hours or some different model, that also needs to be part of your policy, and you need to let them know ahead of time what that is. Finally, you have to notify your patrons, your customers, in writing. So this could be a notice on your menu, maybe a table tent, something on the table, on the bill or receipt, but somewhere in writing, you have to let the customers know that this is what's happening. An example of a restaurant group doing this is the Frasca Hospitality Group, offering the Frasca Food and Wine, Tavernetta, Pizzeria Locale, and Sunday Vinyl have a tip pooling method. Moving on, we want to touch briefly on profit sharing. While this isn't quite the same type of alternative pay model, it is an alternate compensation structure that accomplishes a somewhat similar goal for your employees as a way of getting rid of tipping, whether you eliminate it or not. Typically with profit sharing, you're not going to have tipping anymore at your restaurant. Instead, you're going to have a profit sharing model where the full cost of the dining experience, including the complete wages for all of your employees, are folded into the menu price. Your employees then receive a percentage of this overall revenue. Percentages can be determined by your positions, your tenure, your hours worked. If you do decide to go this route, we highly recommend talking both to a lawyer and to a CPA. Your CPA will be able to help you navigate the tax implications of how this works and make sure you're setting up the financial back end of your business properly for this. Then we want to talk just really quickly about two other methods, the 2-tip line and the tip outs. We're not huge fans of either of these, but if the stuff that we've talked about already feels like really overwhelming and maybe you're just not quite there yet as a business, these are great sort of starter entry options to get going if you want to be moving in this direction. So the first is the inclusion of 2 tip lines. And what this does is on your bill, you'll have, instead of just one place for the customer to enter a tip, you'll have 2 separate lines. One tip will go to your servers and one tip will go to the kitchen staff. And the customer gets to decide how much each group of employees should receive. Please note that the tip credit is still not available for the back of house staff, even if they receive tips in this manner. And that's coming back to Colorado law, which says that the tipped wage credit is only available for folks who typically receive tips, and back of house staff just don't fall into that category. The other option is a tip out model where you ask your tipped employees, so the people in the front of the house, to contribute a portion of their tips to the back of house staff. If you go this route, a couple legal things to just have on your radar screen: the tip outs must always be voluntary. You as the employer may not suggest a tip out amount, and you may not penalize or retaliate against your tipped employees who choose not to participate. So this one, I think, can have some disincentives as well. It can put a lot of pressure on your folks who are receiving the tips, pressure to feel like they have to pay out the back end, but also they may already be struggling to cover their own rent and bills. So I think it does sort of put your employees, pitting them against each other a little bit. So it may work for your group. All of these are really, case by case, depending on your culture and how you operate as a team. So a tip out model may work for some folks. That's all. That's what we have to go over with you guys today. We're hoping for questions and really want to be here as a resource for you all. Like I said, for those of you watching a recording and can't ask questions, please feel free to reach out to Jason and or myself. Our emails are here at the bottom. we're love hearing from people and love helping you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. So we'll start with maybe looking at some questions in the chat. It looks like we do have, oh, no, just a thank you. Thank you. Robert, you said you received some questions in advance of the presentation, perhaps?
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda and Jason, for the great overview. That was really kind of the point, was to just kind of give us an overview of these different models, and then really engage with people on the call and answer some questions so we can make it as relevant to your situation as possible. So before I ask a few of my questions, is there anyone on the call that wants to open up a line of inquiry? And you can, you can speak live, or you can submit the question if you'd like. Couple of general, just while we're waiting for some activity there, just some top level questions. Overall, do you see the legal risks being present or increasing in any of the major model categories that you covered? So just in terms of, any trends in the law that might make one of, make some of these models more challenging for businesses, or vice versa.
I think the tip pooling method could trip some employers up, just because of there's so many minute little rules around the tipped wage credit, and who you can give tips to, and who you can, and when you can pay them sub-minimal wage and when you can't. So it's not anything folks can't navigate, but I would say if you're choosing to go that direction, I would, talk to a lawyer and just make sure you've got all the pieces right. The last thing you want to do is be, taking steps to better the lives of your employees, making it a better culture to work in, and then you slip up and, have some legal snafu and end up in trouble. So I always think it's better on the front end, talk to your CPA, just make sure your ducks are in a row.
Yeah.
I would additionally flag there, I think the tip out model, I know we just touched on it briefly, but tip outs, employees often feel some kind of pressure from their employer, whether that's intended or not. And just, the employee, if they are feeling like there is a significant amount of pressure for them to tip out the back of house staff or, their bartender, they may bring a claim based on that pressure that they feel they've been retaliated against, or they feel they're being treated unfairly in that regard. So.
Yeah, the next question is, are there any legal costs or financial filings that must accompany moving to one of the models you mentioned? In addition, well, obviously, the tip pooling is one of the few models that you kind of have to have some policies in place, and we'll probably expand on that in a later question. But are there any other legal or financial filings that need to accompany this transition?
I would say I'm a litigator, so I always see things when they've gone wrong. And so I am a huge proponent of putting everything in writing, whether it's the tip pooling, which is required by law for you to have it in writing, versus your service charge or whatever model you're going to go with. I say put it in writing, have a policy, even if you do it yourself, something so that later on when employees, if you have someone with an issue, you can point back and say, I have that, you saw this, it was handed out, you signed it. I think you just can never go wrong with that. In terms of financial filings, unfortunately, we don't have a CPA here today. And so I don't think neither Jason nor I are tax attorneys. So we don't want to probably opine on that. My guess is there probably are steps you need to take on your tax filings having to do with anything where you're working with tips. So I would certainly ask your CPA.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a good CPA, I'd recommend, feel free to reach out to us, ask someone who are they using, who they like. Your CPA is your very good friend.
Right. So going a little deeper onto that, with the policy notification for using a tip pool model, is there any legal requirements that our members or people would need to know about related to the time frame? You know, if you're an existing business and you want to transition to a tip pooling model, do you have to post that policy and notify your staff for a minimal period of time before you're allowed to actually implement it? And I assume on the customer side, it's just once you publish it on the menu or, you know, to the customer directly, that probably complies with that. But more importantly, on the staff side.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here on this one. There isn't a required notice period before implementing it, but of course, you do have to notify your staff before taking it. So there's no required amount of time, but you know, best practice, you should, I think, present them the policy, as Amanda was saying. If you can get that in writing, have them sign an acknowledgement to it, you know, that they understand this is the model and how they're going to be paid. And if you can do that a day or two in advance, and then, you know, have it go live at a date at some point in the future after you've notified them. And then you're right there. Just when you are doing a tip pooling model, just having something to notify the customers, you know, there's no required notice period there either. Just needs to be evident to the customers when they're sitting down at the table, you know, if it's on their receipt or if it's on the menu, it just has to be available to them.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jason. Obviously, most people are going to have several weeks, if not months, of notice because they'll be working on this wage model well before they just implement it. But helpful to know how many pay periods you might need to engage the staff with before you want to roll something new out. Are there any legal limits to the percentages or the scoring system that you're allowed to use with tip pooling allocations and service charge distributions?
Yeah, so I'll start with service charges because I think that's an easier one to talk about here. You know, as Amanda stated, service charges are income to the employer. They belong solely to the employer. So the employer gets to determine how to split those up in its sole discretion. So there's no restrictions there as to how they pay their staff, you know, provided that they're paying at least the minimum wage. So that can be allocated, you know, more so to the front of house staff, or I think Amanda also talked about, you can give a percentage per hour that's worked by each employee. So they kind of move up as they work more hours. In tip pooling as well, there's no restrictions on the percentages that you kind of allocate to each employee, provided that they are all making at least minimum wage. So if you're going to do a tip pooling model combined with the tipped wage credit, wherein only the front of house would be pooling those tips, once again, you just have to ensure that that employee's wage plus the tips is equaling at least the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you ever heard or worked with a business that kind of does a stakeholder engagement with their staff to get their direct input on what they think is the best kind of distribution formula for shared income?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. We work with some restaurant breweries that have, you know, breweries, but also that serve food, that certainly have engaged with their staff, particularly during COVID. I think this has been a time when we've seen the most successful folks that we've worked with are folks who have really banded together, and owners and supervisors have you know, made it more of an equal playing field in terms of everybody's voice is important. And that doesn't mean necessarily that the owner's going to, you know, act on every single suggestion or recommendation from each employee, but they definitely solicit input, gather opinions, and make decisions based on the group and not just the owner. We've seen a lot of staff who have really stuck it out through some really hard times, I think, because they really respect the place they're working and feel like they're they're all in it as a team, and they're taking the highs and lows together, as opposed to maybe the owners sort of staying up here and letting other folks sink.
Yeah. I personally think that's one of the highest leverage points of looking at these alternative wage models, is really just to shift the culture. We have so much to work on in terms of the inequalities and kind of specific wage things with individual employees, but addressing the culture of the industry is important too. Getting the front of house and back of house to be on the same team, and to really be able to get people to be invested, in the common mission of the restaurant, I think is really important. And these wage models, they have so much economic and social benefit to the people that are working at businesses with these models, but it's just such a high leverage opportunity, I think, to shift the culture.
Absolutely. And I want to
yeah.
say it's not just restaurants. I think this is happening across like tons of different industries and sectors. Folks are realizing that, the business can do better and be more successful if everybody's on the same team. So it's really cool to be watching restaurants go through this same transformation that we're watching businesses across all the industries go through in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Probably one of the most amazing models that I've heard about, and it's not one of our members, it's not a Colorado restaurant, but one of our organizational partners. And they have a couple of units, small independent restaurant with a couple of units, and they have experimented with different models over time, but have landed most recently in the last year or so on basically this creation of an employee council that's kind of nominated from the staff. And that employee council gets to be the liaison basically between the staff and the ownership. And as long as they have a unanimous decision, they actually get to decide what formula of the shared income distribution it gets to be. So that's really interesting in terms of just really getting the staff involved. That's not right for everybody, but I really appreciate where that's going in the sense of helping our staff understand some of the really hard decisions that we have to make. And I think giving them a little bit of, contribution and a seat at the table, so to speak, I just think that's really compelling. Does anybody have any comments on that? Yeah, we might be able to hopefully get him to share a little bit of information about his business model with us later and record that. Let's see. I do have a couple more questions from submissions. Let's see. Is there any connection or increased potential liability between adopting a different model and its impact on workers' compensation? Policies that may be directly connected to the where your payments are connected to the wage level that you're actually at. Your premium would be affected by your payroll.
Yeah, it's a great question. Without looking at specific numbers, I don't think Jason or I can answer that exactly. My guess would be that the difference in wages is small enough that it would not impact your workers' compensation. However, I think that's a great thing to be thinking about, and I would absolutely shoot an email or call your workers' compensation provider and just confirm if that's a concern for you in making the change. Saying this is what we're thinking about doing, how would that, if at all, affect our numbers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't know how to answer that myself. I'm going to look into that. Are there any legal risks to experimenting with different wage models over time, kind of in the context of any legal implications of changing your wage model during the same fiscal year? and say you changed your model more than once because you're experimenting. I've had several people, go through kind of an experimental phase and wanting to try different things. Can you legally change your wage model every 6 months and you just have a lot more paperwork and CPA hours to track all that? But are there any legal?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you kind of hit it on the head there, that there's going to be quite a bit more paperwork and CPA hours on the accounting side of it. But legally, I think just the item you need to be aware of if you're going to do that is compliance with each of the model's requirements. So, as we've discussed, if you're going from a tip pooling model to a service charge model, and you're going to be sharing, that the service charge differently than the tips, you want to be clear on that in terms of a compliance standpoint and notifying your employees and taking care of all of those. So in addition to the CPA hours, you may have a few legal hours in review of kind of your employee handbook and policies as you're distributing them. Something to be aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think also, and this really goes, you could answer almost any question with this, but just being careful of any appearance of discrimination, that you're not, changing models in a way that is, or even gives an appearance of you're doing it to benefit an age population or a race or religion or whatever it may be. Just, always being aware of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, somebody asked, can you use, oh, well, no, that was already covered. So they should probably pick up that answer. Do you know of any legal differences for the service charge models where your staff receives the same base wage versus varying base wages?
And so I think if I understand you there, I think the answer would be kind of the flexibility that the service charge model gives, because it is income to the employer, allows you to kind of treat both of those the same from a legal perspective. That, provided that the minimum wage is being paid, you can share those kind of however the employer sees fit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. I would like to put out one more call. Is there anyone in our live audience that wants to ask a follow-up question?
Hi, this is Lee Wood. I've got a quick question I think has already been addressed, but I just wanted to see. So in the eyes of the state of Colorado, do you have to fit into one of these models? Is there overlap? I mean, I assume that under the tipped pooling model, which is currently how I operate for my tasting room outside of my distillery, if I went to a service charge model, I guess that's basically the only requirement is that you start with a base wage that's better than minimum wage, right? Other than that, you can kind of do whatever you want. And so I'm trying to, and I'm not even sure where I'm going with this question exactly, but I'm just trying to, none of these models really seem to satisfy all the various criteria that I'm trying to figure out. One of which is, of course, I'm trying to minimize tax and employee expense models, right? So in a service charge model, you wind up still paying more in various employment taxes and FICA and SUDA and all that stuff. Which of course, there's nothing wrong with that. It just, cash is tight, right? And so trying to balance that with being fair, paying a fair wage, and making sure that everybody gets a reasonable compensation and is taken care of. And then of course we have this added piece of having manufacturing in the back and front of the house in the front, and balancing out the salaries for the manufacturing folks with the front of the house people is a real challenge as well. But oh, and now I've lost, there was a question in there somewhere. Now I've lost it in that whole debate. But trying to balance these models out. Oh, I know where I was going with it. And then educating the customer, of course, is really difficult. And that's probably the hardest part of this whole entire thing, right? Because, even if you go to a service charge model, or if you go to some of these other things that don't explicitly include tipping, getting customers to stop tipping is really a challenge. And then you have high performing, senior people who say, they're making a lot more than the part-time, 2-3 shifts a week kind of a person. And they're like, oh, we want to keep the tipping versus we don't, there's a ton of stuff to balance here. And, I see these models, I'm just not quite zeroing in on the right one, and one that balances all these competing interests. I appreciate the conversation. It's why I'm sitting here trying to figure it out, but I still don't see the solution yet.
Yeah. It does get complicated very quickly. I think you hit on, Lee, one of the great points that should help anchor kind of your decision-making process, which is the ratio of, in your case, production staff versus hospitality staff. Whether you're a full-service restaurant or a different, kind of business, I think plays a leading role in kind of how you would want to balance that out. Because if you only have, if you have 2-3 times the amount of production or culinary staff than you do hospitality staff, how you're going to approach, equalizing wages and treating everybody well and lifting up your workforce is quite different. What would you mind sharing your ratio of back and front of house, and maybe that can help us help you refine your questioning a little bit.
In terms of the number of people, it's very heavy front of the house. Probably have, and we're a tiny outfit, so any of these numbers are all small, but maybe 6 or 8 people out front and 2 people in the back.
Okay. So in that case, does it seem reasonable that the wages from the front of house would be more easily shared with your production distillers?
Yeah, I think so. And that I'm sort of less concerned about, because that I think we can balance out reasonably well. But really, it's more just a structure of
cost benefit
of exactly how do we, because we're so heavy on the front of the house, how do we, or can we, find a model that pays fairly as well as absorb the extra costs. And then can we train the customers? I think those are probably the 2 fundamental questions.
Right. Now, are you looking at this obviously long term? And I'm just curious, because we have to kind of craft this conversation around the pandemic recovery lens as well. Is, PPP or idle funding, are you looking at wages as a central loan forgiveness piece? Is there a connection for you?
Well, we actually participated in both rounds of the PPP, and our wages were, 100 and some percentage of the requirements. So that was not a problem. So we far exceeded that, because we really didn't lay anybody off, and we kept, to the extent that we could, the number of hours, and, bumped up hourly, and, everyone's already making above minimum wage just as their base anyways. But, so the PPP, they were lifesavers. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that was critical. But it didn't really factor that much into the decision.
Okay. Yeah, this sounds like a permanent long-term.
Oh, this is definitely
decision
long-term.
You want to make. Yeah.
Yeah, because I follow like Danny Meyer and what he tried to do, and then of course backed off of that, and just keep looking at all these models, because it just I look at what everybody's getting paid, and it just looks
right.
The tip just skews everything, in my view, really unfairly, and I just don't know how to respond to it. Because I can't afford to just say, all right, so our bartenders at Saturday nights or lead bartenders or whatever making $50 an hour, and my people in the back are making $20 or $25 an hour. I can't just take and pay my people in the back $50 an hour to try to make up for the people in the front. But the people in front are like, no, don't take it away. I don't want to. I don't want my tips to go away. You know, so it's just complicated.
Yeah,
I-
one thing I
Go ahead.
would just emphasize is the hybrid model. You know, you can do a small service charge along with the entry still for tipping. And then calling the service charge, you know, giving it a name that sort of indicates to your customers where that money's going. As well as having maybe something on your menu or on the bill that I really like it when restaurants give an explanation of like what that service charge is for and what they're doing with that money. I always really appreciate that. So I do think, you know, then you aren't increasing your taxes too much if you're keeping your service charge low, but you can sort of use that money to supplement folks who aren't getting to partake in the upside of the tipping as much.
Yeah, I think that certainly helps. I'll look into that a lot more in depth because I hadn't really thought about this sort of hybrid model. Or at least I haven't put really numbers to it to see what makes sense, but it seems like it might be a good middle ground, at least as a transition to, you know, something better.
Yeah. What about Amanda or Jason? Would Lee be able to do a service charge, for example, and allocate some of that money to benefits in a way that decreases his payroll liabilities, but basically, you know, offers the employee something of you know, cash value and a benefit that they would otherwise be spending for out of pocket? Lee has something like that. Could you look at doing something creative like that maybe?
Yeah,
Financial.
I don't know if that was directed at me, but one of the things, you know, I've been trying to look at is the qualified health savings plan, to see if that's something that might make some sense to add to the mix. You know, those sorts of things. Again, it's we have a mix of part-time and full-time people, so, you know, again, making that fair is figuring out the rules around that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if, you know, so for example, if I could do something like this, add some benefits, whether it's paid time off or, you know, some sort of health program, and then deduct that, then that suddenly becomes a little more workable of a program.
Okay.
And that actually might be a way to sell it to the staff as well, because they're typically the most resistant to changing these, you know, the tip structure.
Right. I will share with you, Lee, just the members of ours that have gone to the service charge, from fine dining to fast casual. You know, obviously there have been instances where your top tipped worker earners aren't as happy with the switch, and you might lose, you know, a couple of those high earners. In most cases, though, I have heard that because of their commitment to it and their translation of why they're doing it to the team, in all cases, it's been received very well outside of just the couple of employees that didn't like it. But it's also a cultural shift in committing to changing the dynamics of the workforce. And at the end of the day, most everybody says that we want to attract team players. And, you know, certainly I can appreciate, you know, people making $50 an hour in hospitality, but, you know, there's a big picture for the industry to address the sustainability of everyone involved. And there's going to be a little bit of adaptation for everybody. But I would just leave that with you. You know, you might lose a couple high earners, but you will probably end up with a much more solid, integrated team as a result.
Well, thanks. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so I certainly appreciate all.
Oh, that's okay.
No, we appreciate that, Lee. I have a feeling you're not the only one going through this conundrum. So
Oh, yeah.
we appreciate you sharing it.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. I don't want to put any of our other participants on the spot, but I'd love to, because I have some very specific things I'd like you all to say. But yeah, we're fine to wrap this up at a reasonable time, but we also have allocated time to answer more questions. So I won't name any names, but does anybody else want to either give some comments about your experience in using any of these models, any of the challenges or insights you could share, or questions?
Yeah, hi, this is Alicia with Frasca Hospitality Group.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I've just been kind of listening in, and I apologize. I'm quite busy here. I'm covering for our HR director as she's gone on maternity leave. But yeah, we started doing what we call a whole house hospitality this year. And so each of our hourly employees makes minimum wage. And then we designate a point in our tip pool system that goes anywhere from 1 to 6 points. And we evenly allocate the tips accordingly to each hourly employee. So typically for each point, you're seeing about $6 additional per hour going to that employee. So our new hires who start at 1 point in the tip pool in Boulder are getting the $12.32 minimum wage hourly, and then plus an additional $6 or $5 to $7 an hour. So it's really great. It's getting them up to about $17 or $18 an hour. And then our those that are making, 6 points in the tip pool are getting an additional $36 an hour on top of that. So it's really great. The people that are getting 6 points in the tip pool have been here for more than 2 years, I think is the threshold there. And within the first 90 days, new hires are either at a 1.5 points or, well on their way to 2 points. We're even doing quarter point increments because it's about $1 an hour raise. And, when you do that for 40 hours a week times the whole year, it's a $2,000 an hour raise. So it's been really, really great to see back of house staff not working minimal overtime or none at all, when previously we were telling them, to make a livable wage, you have to be working overtime during those. So it's just been so great. The front of house has barely seen, a difference in their pay. It has gone down maybe a little bit, but nothing that anyone's complaining about. And yeah, we're really, really happy with how it's going and the camaraderie and everything.
How about your customers, Alicia? Any statement you can make
we're
about
not doing
that?
a service charge, so they just tip as they tip.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that we've really broadcasted that yet to
Oh, it's not table side yet?
But
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Definitely.
It is
Hey, Alicia, do you think I could contact you to get a little more detail on how you structure that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd be happy to share kind of like our template with you of what we enter into it and how we enter it. We have everything on an Excel sheet, and we've been doing mail merges to email out their average hourly that week, every week. So it's really, we've gotten it pretty dialed in. And at this point, it's kind of just a plug and play to what the numbers are each week. And really easy. Yeah, you can definitely contact me. I'll type my email in the chat here.
Okay. Sounds good. And I love your restaurants.
Thank you.
We're making peer connections now. This is good stuff happening.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to help you,
Yeah,
Lee.
thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. Our presenters, do you have anything that you think would be valuable to add based on our conversation?
No, I think it's really exciting to watch folks, like learn from each other. I know in the law, I reach out to folks all the time. People reach out to me. There's so much good knowledge out there that gets stuck, I think, in the place where it's been created. And there's so much awesome room for just sharing information and learning from each other. So that was really cool to see. Again, I would just put it out there. Please feel free to reach out to Jason or I if anything comes up in the future. If you think of anything, if you want to run something by us, we're always happy to hop on a quick call and chat, do a consultation. Don't think you're going to call us and it's going to start getting super expensive right away. We love talking to you guys and helping. So please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out if something does come up.
Definitely.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll give a last call for questions, and then we'll put this on the Good Business Colorado YouTube channel, the recording, and you'll also be able to see it on resilientrestaurants.org. And if you want a little bit different angle, as I mentioned before, we have a video from last fall with one of our members presenting some of the financial implications of the scenario of minimum wage increases and looking at using tip pooling and service charge models. But we are really happy that we have this great overview of all the wage models that we believe add equity to the industry. And we look forward to a lot of comments from many of the folks who will be watching the recording throughout this year. Thank you everyone for joining us.